right, good to go. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome along. This is a very exciting event, one of our hybrid events. So we have about 20 or 30 people in this office at Airtree in Sydney, and about 100 plus joining us online this morning. So welcome. Look, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we acknowledge their elders past, present, and emerging. They're the original community. We also are a community now, but they were the original ones, so thank you to them. This morning, I'm your host, Ian Gardner, so I think I know a lot of you, but welcome along. I'm a co-founder at Innovation Bay. I'm also a VC. I'm an investment partner with Gelix. Quick thank you and hello, and thank you to the building noise. I don't know whether that's coming through, but it's great timing. Thanks to the rest of the Innovation Bay team. I got Faden in Hobart. Here we got Anna, Claire, and Alison. Sam's in Melbourne and CJ's in Byron. So we are a remote team. We love the startup community and we work hard to bring this community together across Australia. If you don't know about Innovation Bay, we are a community. We represent Australia mostly, but a bit of New Zealand. Now that the travel bubble's open, that's on again. We've been going since 2003. And we create connections across the tech landscape. We do events, we do programs, we do content. We've got some clubs. Bringing founders, leaders and investors together to share experiences. We're recruiting right now. We've got 4 roles open. We've had a bit of a good run at it. So there is more information on the website. So you'll find it on our website, on Twitter feed or LinkedIn. So check that out because we'd love to hear from you. Quick thank you to our sponsors this morning. So we have some national sponsors. So Macquarie Bank, IAG Pharmac Ventures, that I'll mention a bit more in a minute, KPMG's High Growth Ventures team, and AWS. So we couldn't do any of this without them, so I really want to thank them a lot. Big thank you as well to Airtree for hosting us this morning in their fabulous office in Surrey Hills. And also a big thank you to IAG. Mike helped us pull this together, encouraged us to do this particular topic with this particular panel. So thank you to IAG for that. What else are we doing? We like talking about topics that help you in your startup journey. We're doing more of these hybrid sessions. We really like it. We get to hang out with each other again, which is really nice to be back together, but we also get loads of people online and joining. So check it out. This morning, we do want to encourage questions. I can talk all day for anyone who knows me, and I will ask questions all day, but I would encourage you to do the same. So we're using Slido, which allows anyone in the room or anyone watching to do the same thing. So code is big climate change, so go to sli.do and vote it up. So if you see a question that you really want to have answered and you haven't asked it yourself, you can vote it up, which is really useful. Right, this morning we are going to talk about a very important and a very timely topic, climate change, and how we're going to combat it with big data. I'll just give a bit of an overview. I mean, it's been decades now that we've been talking about climate change and how bad it's going to be. For about 4 decades, scientists have suggested that if we double the carbon dioxide levels from prehistoric times, it's going to result in a temperature increase between 1.5 and 4.5 degrees Celsius. Last year, Steven did a report, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a sec, that suggested that the new estimate for the increase in world temperatures over the next century is now between 2.5 and 4 degrees Celsius. So it's a lot, it's pretty bad. I'm sure we'll talk about some of the impacts. Some areas of the world are going to be worse impacted, I think, but it's across the board. It's not good. Now, what can we do about it? I think we all want to do something. That's, I think, why we're here. Now, one answer lies in the use of big data. Now, it sounds a little bit esoteric, but it's not, and we'll get into why that is. Data, we measure pollutants, we measure gases, but it also has the potential to make the economy greener as well. So we'll get into some of that. Again, I've talked about IAG, but I do want to thank Mike and the IAG team and just talk a little bit about that. So IAG's, the purpose is to make the world a safer place for all the communities it serves. You released a paper, I think it was last September, Mike. So IAG released a paper which highlighted the effects of climate change and indicated that Australians are definitely going to suffer more extreme weather events, which we've already seen this year. Last year was fires, this year was floods. We're going to see more of that, and it's going to result in greater property, personal and economic damage. And we've seen a lot of that as well, and it's bad when it happens. So we want to fix that. And IAG, unique ability to help communities prepare for and manage climate impacts while realizing the business opportunities of a safer world. So thanks, IAG. I've been talking way too much, so let's quickly meet the panel and ask them some questions rather than me banging on anymore. So Martin Wilder, welcome. You are a founding partner of Pollination Group, a climate change advisory and investment firm. You've done a heap of stuff, Martin. It's pretty amazing. So a leader in climate law and sustainable investing. You were head of Baker McKenzie's global climate law and finance practice for over 20 years. And you're still playing a key role with Australia's clean energy finance institutions. You were chair of ARENA. You're a former director of CEFC. And a former director of the Climate Council. You're currently president of WWF Australia and the chair of the New South Wales Climate Change Council. So welcome, Martin. Kristen, you've just been in the podcast. Hopefully everyone's just listened to that. That was awesome. So you are a director of the CEFC, which is part of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which is an investment fund. You're responsible for originating and managing investments in these early stage energy companies that we'll hear all about. Before that, you were a director at Champ Ventures and private equity, where you just did a bunch of stuff. I mean, it's pretty super impressive, the range that you've been exposed to. Steven Sherwood, Dr. Steven Sherwood. I think, Chris, you're a doctor as well, aren't you? So that's not in my notes, but I picked that one up. Steven, you're a climate scientist and professor at the Climate Change Research Centre at UNSW. You have studied how the various processes in the atmosphere are establishing climate and climate change, and how the processes might expect to control the way climate does change, and how the atmosphere is going to react. And you got a PhD from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Welcome. And finally, Chris Tyler, the founder and CEO of Fireball International, discovered before you have a PhD in astrophysics, amongst some other impressive credentials. Fireball has developed and is maintaining an early wildfire detection, assessment and mapping system called Fuego. It's using ground-based sensor data and satellite data with sophisticated deep machine learning algorithms. So basically you can spot a fire when it's when it lights and do something about it, or get other people to do something about it. So that is the panel, and that was way too long an intro, so thank you for bearing with me. Right, let's get into it. Steven, I might start with you because you've been doing a lot of the research in this, and my first question is, look, where are we at? I mean, just how fucked are we as a planet?
I don't know. I think things aren't looking any better than they were, and we need to do something. And it's encouraging to see that even though the politicians don't really want to do anything, the business world is doing things. And so I hope that will continue. So we're certainly not learning anything that makes the problem look like it's going away. I was just on a call this morning, and with other people from the World Climate Research Program, we're starting a new initiative to try to look at the problem more as a risk management problem rather than just, well, here's the most likely things that will happen, because there's a lot of uncertainty. Yeah. And so, yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
All right. Well, so we are in bad shape. I mean, the Paris Climate Accord suggested that they wanted to keep the rise at 1.5 degrees, but are you saying that that's pretty much impossible now?
I think 1.5 is gone, and 2 is optimistic, right. And probably necessary. Right. After 2, you start running big risks. You know, losing Greenland ice sheet, losing rainforests around the world, evacuating Northern Australia and other similar climates, etc. Right. So, yeah, we don't want that to happen.
All right, look, I'm sure we'll talk some more on that. And again, if you've got questions, I'd encourage you to jump in Slido and fill them in. Martin and Kristen, I'd like your input in this. The topic today is big data and how we're using it. Like, what is this data? Where is this data coming from? That's the first question. And secondly, can we rely on it? Because some of it's coming from China, Russia, Brazil, and other countries that may not actually want to do much about this. Yeah, so where's the data and can we trust it? Maybe Martin first and then Kristen.
So I think the first question is, what data are you talking about? So the point that you just made about the science data. So the key to everything that we do is understanding what's going on with science, understanding what impacts that are having. And then I think the point that was being made is when you get to a certain point in the system, it starts to collapse, and you actually, no data is going to help you understand what's going to happen. So I think the first thing is the scientists around the world have been collecting data on what's going on. And interestingly, a lot of governments are following that data, and it forms the basis of the IPCC, which forms the basis of the Paris Agreement. But then in terms of where we go after that, you need governments to basically embrace that data, then start to legislate policy that's off the back of that. And obviously organisations like IAG, other insurance companies, ironically, have been collecting this data for many years about what's going on with the planet, what's going on in terms of risk, what's going on with weather patterns, and they use that to provide, to basically take positions on risk. So I think the data is over time on science around climate has been building significantly. The question is then how do you use that data? And then I think the second big area of data is as new technologies come out, how do those technologies work and disrupt the system? And so one of the key things that we looked a lot with in ARENA was the fact that you have many new entrants in the energy market, and those entrants like solar and wind and batteries are all having a disruption on the market, and understanding how that works and how that can all be pieced together. And technology and data plays a key role in understanding how these new innovations will change things. So I think both in terms of understanding what's going on and what you can do and how that works is important.
But I mean, the data is from across. I mean, you've got atmospheric data, you've got way up in the stratosphere, you've got ocean. I mean, what is there any new data that we're getting now that's going to be more useful than others?
Well, I think the scientific data is constantly evolving, and the work that's being done is always sort of is always evolving. We're understanding that. One of the challenges is that we just simply don't know in some areas what is going to happen, and so we're a constant collection of data on the scientific point of view. From a technology point of view, I think in many ways we're at the beginning. I mean, that the data about how technology works, how it disrupts the system is very important, but we have to collect that and understand that. And I think in a lot of areas it's very new. I mean, I'll just give you one example where we're quite involved in, and that in that area is basically in the natural capital space. So looking at how do you invest in nature, understanding actually what is going on in nature, what the value of nature is. If you make an investment, how do you actually work out the value of that? It hasn't really been done before. So on many of these areas, we're really at the start of the journey.
Yeah. Kristen, when I was at school, we used to plot the graph first before you did the experiment, just to make sure you got the results right. I mean, is any of that stuff happening now when you're looking at companies? I mean, is it possible to massage the data to, deliver an outcome that you as a company want, or even as a country? So how? Yeah,
I think that's always possible. So I think if you Google data accuracy, or how accurate is data from different companies and different countries, I think it's always possible to massage it. And I think from the fundamental kind of scientific data, I think that has been well and truly peer reviewed. Looking at the long-term trends around all the climate data, I think there's a lot of accuracy there. I think it is a challenge around, I think how, like, with more and more companies coming out and having net zero targets, there's a whole host of opportunities and challenges around, how do you actually measure all through supply chains, and transparently report on that. I think there is absolutely, a challenge around it. And it's, I think the energy system is one of the most fascinating areas. I think it's so complex to run and to monitor and control, particularly as it gets more and more, changes so much at the moment, and the climate's changing as well. So I think there's just more and more need for it. But yeah, I mean, I did see something really interesting, I think, in terms of kind of veracity of data. There was a really interesting development I was reading about yesterday about a group called Planet in the US that is actually they run a whole lot of satellites and use that kind of data to monitor climate. And they're working on a project that is promising to be able to actually monitor emissions, so carbon dioxide and methane, from point source, and understand exactly who's emitting what. Now, I guess you have to question that. That's a great way of kind of validating people's reports, but you do also then need to question how much effort is going into actually monitoring that versus the benefit that you're getting out of it.
Yeah. Chris, you're at the pointy end of this. You are a startup founder. So kudos to you for doing that. Maybe tell us a little more about Fireball, what you're trying to do, and how you're using data to support that thesis.
Fireball comes out of a Nobel Prize-winning research of Professor Carl Pennypacker at UC Berkeley. And Carl measured the expansion rate of the universe. Now I'm going into astrophysics. By looking at explosion in supernovas in far distance galaxies. We're talking about millions of light years away, looking for a small explosion. And when a wildfire raged through Carl's neighborhood and destroyed 3 of his neighbors' houses, he was thinking, how can we use what I'm doing in an academic area, collecting this data? How can I use this to do something positive? Because one thing is clear. I think the science points very clearly in the direction where we are going. Wildfires will, because of climate change, increase. We have models which show us that in Australia alone, we have 2.67 big events every year. With climate change, this goes up to nearly 4. And we have
you're talking big events in terms of fires, right?
And because it's drier, hotter, etc.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, it's a positive feedback cycle, isn't it? So
Exactly,
more
because
fires, more emissions.
More fires, more emissions.
Yeah.
So,
But it is that simple. It's like a hotter climate equals more fires. I mean, is it quite as simple as that?
it's not quite as simple as that, but if you boil it down, that's the simplest equation you can make. Hotter, more fire. Hotter, drier, more fires. And let me give you a little bit background stories which are around that, which is when I was in Berkeley 2 years ago before COVID hit us. It was the first time that we had fires on both continents at the same time. That never happens. You have a fire, you have a break between the fires, you shift your assets forward and back. The assets from Australia to California, they go into fire season, people over there, and then our fire season is supported by the California. This was the first time that I got a phone call from my office and said, we are evacuated, we have a big fire in Parisian Beach. And I got no power in the hotel because in California they turned off the power to avoid more fires. So it is obvious, all the data points in the direction that fires clearly related with the warming of the planet.
And do you rely on your own data to support your customers and your business, or is there a lot of public data that you have to use?
We use we use both. We have 2 systems. We call them Fuego. Fuego is Spanish word for fire, but stands also for astrophysics. Again, we like our abbreviation. Stands for Fire Urgency Estimator in Geostationary Orbit. So, so we use satellites right now from NOAA and NASA, from JAXA, from the Japanese Space Agency, from ESA in Europe. So what we have a network of geostationary satellites looking down always at the same half sphere of the planet to determine in real time if there's fire down there. So this is also fused with data from ground-based sensors. We will have about 1,000 sensors in California, about 50 in Australia right now. So we're building the network up here. But this data goes then in the AWS cloud, where there's a series of artificial intelligence algorithms looking at this data. I give you just an amount of data we process. In California alone, last year, we processed over 1 billion images just to look for sign of fires from the ground-based system, and about 500,000 images every second image down from the satellites. We use every satellite we can get our hand on. So that is the data we use from external services. But we also build our own satellites. We will launch the first Australian satellite with an Australian rocket from Australian soil in March 2022, which looks for fire. And then in 2025, we'll have a geostationary asset up here.
Yeah. All right, awesome. Steven, I might jump back to you. So like your job is to just analyze this data, bring your teams together, and work out what to do with it and what's going on. I'm sure there's way more than that. But I mean, how do you think about that? You've got all this data. How do you collate it in order to try and encourage people, companies, countries to make better decisions about what they're doing?
Well, this is a huge problem for us right now because we're using the same kinds of data that Chris just described, but we're also running models which are generating even more data, and then trying to make sense out of that is a challenge that I think the community is trying to grapple with right now. Artificial intelligence, machine learning is becoming a big deal all of a sudden to try to process all this data and draw out what you want. And I guess you're talking about a few things. One is we want to be able to predict better, but we also want to be able to do things like pinpoint sources of greenhouse gases, so that because this is very useful for finding out where you have a problem, detecting fires. So there's a lot of different applications to the data.
Yeah. maybe talk about investment, and I'll ask you, Kristen, but Martin, you've also got a bit of a venture arm coming in at the moment. Yeah, how are you making investment decisions? You know, you think of Fireball or FloodMap or, you know, any of the companies out there using data to drive, you know, climate change related issues, you know, and you've got a difference between return and impact. Is that a thing? So can you just maybe give us some context on how you think about this?
Sure. I guess there are a couple of questions in there. I guess in terms of how we look at from a kind of investment point of view, you know, I think there's some really interesting, really exciting investment opportunities around this space. And as I was saying before, particularly, you know, our mandate's pretty broad. You know, energy's pretty core to it, but we also invest across the kind of the economy, and every area has a great need for this, and you know, generating more and more data. So, you know, we've made a couple of investments into IoT. You know, we certainly see that as a real enabler to energy efficiency and to a whole host of different things. You know, how do you collect that data and how do you make better decisions? And then I guess, you know, we do see a lot of different opportunities, and I think that, you know, we're always, you know, with our you know, always looking at what is the specific problem, like any kind of venture investment. What's the problem that's being solved here, and who's going to pay to solve it? And why does this team and this company have just kind of an unfair advantage or really deep insights into how to solve it? And I think in terms of, you know, often, you know, previously, I think, you know, sometimes in climate tech, there's been really fascinating data and people want to know it, but no one's prepared to pay for it. And I think that has been a bit of a challenge sometimes. And I think certainly I think, you know, when you come to the point around how do you balance impact and returns, I mean, we have a mandate. We can only make investments in that mandate. It's very broad. You know, we look at renewables, we look at energy efficient technologies and low emissions technologies, which basically covers pretty much, you know, most of the economy. But we're very conscious of making sure that every investment we make has a really strong commercial return, and that's, you know, a really good, you know, belief system for us, because we're a $200 million fund, and this, you know, we need so much more capital to address the issues that we have, and we need to show that this is a really strongly investable asset class, and it is. You know, I think so much has changed since, you know, Cleantech 1.0. And more now, I think that we're not having to make that trade-off between impact and, you know, between financial and environmental impact, just because so much of, you know, I think so many of the companies that are addressing environmental issues just make good business sense, particularly in the kind of data area.
Just on that, so one interesting comment is that at the moment we're seeing a lot of companies emerge, seeking investment that are ready to solve the climate problem. But one of the real issues, and I'll give you a good example, is soil carbon. So the government at the moment has made soil carbon a priority. The big challenge is how do you measure it and what data sets do you get to do that? And it's very expensive. So the focus at the moment is bringing down the cost of collecting that data, because if you don't do that, it'll be very difficult to do that. And the government's, I think, identified to go through $9 a tonne to $3 a tonne to bring that down. But this is also where we get into the challenge. In order to measure that data, you adopt a methodology. The federal government has a methodology that's quite strict. The US has a methodology that is less strict, and some proponents in the Australian market have adopted methods that have a lower data set and that are far less expensive to do. And so you have to make a decision as to whether or not you go with that particular business, because it's adopting a less rigorous but a more convenient and realistic way to actually measure the data and use it to get an outcome. And so when the science is telling us that things are moving so fast, do you have to wait for the data to be perfect, or do you just take a step to go quickly? And then the second thing is then also how do you, if you're trying to value the impact of a business in areas where the data just isn't available, that's very difficult. And so in a lot of these new spaces, you're sort of looking or grappling for data sets that don't really necessarily exist, or that are in the process of being created and manufactured. And I think that's one of the challenges that you often face. And finally, there's also the point Kirsten made, which is really important, is about cost. So at the moment, a big issue which a lot of people are looking at is what companies are doing on things around climate. What are they disclosing? And there are a number of players in the market emerging right now about how do you rate companies and their performance, and what are the data sets you use to do that. And no one wants to pay for that. Everyone has an expectation that should just be there and on the market. And so your ability to sell that sort of data I should say your inability to sell that data at a reasonable price means the ability for that data to develop is very slow. So you then come back to relying on companies to disclose that material, and that then relies on governments forcing legislation in, like New Zealand have done last week, to force companies to disclose that data.
Yeah. And maybe I just stick with you two just about the overall investment climate. I mean, Martin, you and I talked about this before. Like, there's some significantly wealthy LPs, family offices, private companies. I mean, you got CFC. I mean, Jeremy from Grok's here. I mean, there's some big players coming into this space now. Have you detected a change in investment appetite?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's clearly, I mean, you saw the announcement last week between Temasek and BlackRock about setting up a VC fund. If you go back to Climate Week in California 2 years ago, there was an announcement by a large number of philanthropy and family offices to move, I think it was $4 or $5 billion into the climate space. When you actually go and see how much of that's moved, it's actually very little. So one of the challenges that you find is that one, there's a limit of things to invest in, and two, it takes time to build those investments. So if everyone's moving out of fossil fuels and coal and eventually gas, what do you invest in? And I think a real effort has to be made to build those investments and build them at scale.
Yeah. A quick reminder to audience, if you've got questions or you want to vote them up, just jump on to Slido and see what's in there. Helps me out because then I don't have to keep asking questions. Look, Chris, I might jump back to you. I mean, look, I mentioned FloodMap before, and there's definitely other startups who are playing in this space. Look, the question for me...
May I say something before?
Yeah, sure, of course. Yeah.
Question, the economic benefit of investing in this technology.
Sure.
We had a ministerial briefing last February in Canberra, and we were asked the question, what is the economic benefit to Australia of a system that detects fire in 10 minutes? It's just one small part of the whole puzzle. But if you look at the question, it's a very interesting question. What is the economic benefit for Australia in that? So we didn't know. We didn't know. So we went over to Australian National University and commissioned a report, and we said, look, can you write us a report? Can you build models that answer these questions without considering the system we have in place with fireball, etc.? Imagine there's someone sitting on a mast with a binocular and a two-way radio, and he detects a fire within 10 minutes. So what is the economic benefit to Australia? Not putting climate change in consideration for this first part of the report was $2.1 billion. Putting climate change in consideration, it's $8.6 billion. So having a system which detects this and informs emergency services so they can act quickly would save the Australian economy $8.6 billion over the next years. So this is an interesting fact because everyone thinks climate change is an investment where we have to put in money. And if you go out and talk to someone, I had this discussion last week. It's a bucket where you fill in money and nothing comes back out. I say completely different. It's a fantastic business opportunity. And it doesn't matter if you look at fire or you look at clean energy or you look anything else which is related to climate change. It's a catastrophe for us humans, but it's also an opportunity to build a completely new ecosystem with successful businesses in that.
Yeah. But your solution ultimately helps consumers and insurers, and I mean it's ultimately good all round. I mean, do you want to just talk a bit more about how it prevents fires from getting out of control and what the benefits of that are?
Yeah, we detect fires when they're about the size of a lorry or a garden shed. We do that with space-based and ground-based asset. And you can imagine it's quite straightforward. If the fire is still small, you need a bucket to put it out. So call in the helicopter and drop the water on it. It's done. It doesn't mean every fire doesn't get out of control. There's still fires getting out of control. We had one in California, 70 knots of wind, helicopter couldn't fly. It was night, power line failed, and it was so dry, it was explosive growth.
Right.
But the Cal Fire immediately recognized the problem and evacuated the towns of Hillsburg, which burned down in this fire. But this is the consequences of an early detection. But about 98% of all fires, if they're detected early, can be put out. And that is a massive economic benefit for the country.
Yeah. All right. Just thank you. Just taking some questions from the audience here. So Mick has asked a question, so let's get voted up, Mick. So Mick Lubinskas from Investable, I guess it is now. The question is, which areas of climate technology does Australia have opportunities to lead the world? Kristen, I might start with you on that one.
Sure. No, great question. So, I mean, I think that there's a whole host of different areas. I do think that certainly within energy, there's risk of kind of going back to, I mean, obviously it's a massive part of climate tech, focusing on energy. And I think, Australia, what we've certainly seen is not only is really great technology coming out of Australia, I mean, Australia's at the forefront of renewables penetration, of rooftop solar penetration. So we are facing the challenges of that earlier. So we are coming up with solutions around that. We're also attracting international solutions into Australia. So we certainly see that, Australia is a great test market for a lot of international companies. It's a big enough market to test your solutions, but it's not such a big market if you make a few mistakes. You're not kind of betting the farm on it. So I think certainly energy tech and just, fantastic, again, just fantastic problem to solve, how you balance generation and demand at all times on the grid. It's already been hard enough when you had kind of this, thermal generation and you had that kind of base load power, and that was centralised, and now you have decentralised generation. You've got, it's more variable. You need to better understand what's kind of coming into the grid, when it's going to come. Also you've got more weather events, and so you more unreliable weather. So you've got to really understand that better. I think also agriculture as well. It's a massive part of Australia's economy, and I think that we're seeing a lot more come through that space, and really interesting stuff happening there. So I certainly think that as well. And then also the built environment. So I think Australian property companies have been very vocal in terms of coming out with net zero targets, and that is pushing, not only kind of, tech for around controlling buildings and optimizing them, but also then this, as we kind of touched on before, how you actually monitor what, people have committed to this target, how you actually measure what their emissions, they're full kind of all the way through the supply chain, embodied emissions in the kind of materials and all the way through, and how do you actually kind of set the baseline and then measure it from there. So there's a whole lot of kind of opportunities coming out of that as well.
All right, there's some great questions coming in. Thank you, Kristen. Martin, I might ask you one more before we jump back to the questions. I wanted to ask about regulation. I mean, you've been playing in that space for a while. What is working from the government's perspective and what they can regulate? Carbon pricing is something specifically I wanted to ask about. It does work, but there's not very many people doing it.
Well, there are actually.
Okay, well, maybe educate me and the rest of us around regulation.
Yeah, I think people often just think, the only fix is technology. And I think that's the wrong view. I mean, technology is critical. The speed of technology uptake is very much driven a lot by policy and regulation. So those countries that have regulated a target to have electric vehicles in by 2030 and phase out all combustion vehicles will get there first. They'll win that race. So that as a result of that, the investment follows and the technology follows, and the investment in the technology follows. And I think that unfortunately in Australia, there is no national energy policy really. There's no emissions pricing at all. There are things that we've had emissions pricing, but we've taken it away. The majority of countries at the moment in the world have either a carbon price or a carbon tax of some impost, which I think in Australia you often forget that. And we do have actually a carbon market in Australia. So the government has set up a fund to buy carbon. There's a lot of people investing. We acted on a transaction a few weeks ago where we sold one of the very large carbon farmers in Australia to a private equity firm. That market is well established and is moving, but we don't have a firm price on carbon. And yet the position right now on carbon markets in the world is where it was back in 2006-07. It is absolutely exploding. So the amount of people who are getting into carbon markets right now is extraordinary. There's a whole push to basically to create green LNG, green minerals, green everything, and green aluminium, green steel. So that is moving very, very quickly. I think in Australia, you're just isolated from that. You don't really realise how significant that plays globally at the moment. So I'd say that. I think secondly, if you have very good policy, then it also drives change and it drives technology investment. So just picking up on the point you were making, one of the real opportunities for Australia is how you pull this together. So if you were to pull together, for example, manufacturing, as well as investing in the transport sector. So a simple example is New South Wales government announced 8,000 electric buses. You can go to China and buy those and bring them back, or you could set up a manufacturing centre here to basically produce batteries, the buses, the whole system, and recycling, which is a key part of this process. So the systemic opportunities are being missed, and that's what you need government and regulation to do, I think, to really drive that.
So the New South Wales government decided to do it themselves, is that right?
New South Wales government has announced they want to procure this. So the question is then, how do you put in good policy that actually drives that? Because at the moment we have renewable economic zones and we have manufacturing zones that are empty. So we need better policy to actually push that and to drive that.
Yeah.
And for example, one of the big issues in Australia is moving energy around the country. So why wouldn't the government have simply said, we're going to build the transmission lines that need to do that, and then we can privatise them later, and to get the private sector in there to do that.
All right. Let me jump back to some more questions. And again, everyone just jump on Slido and vote them up if you like them, or ask some more. This is an anonymous question, and I'll just read it out. So data storage is actually quite energy intensive. Do any of the panelists know of solutions for lowering the greenhouse gas emissions of data centres? Stephen, I might start with you. I don't know whether you've got insight here, but...
Solar power? I don't know. Renewable energy? I mean, it seems like that's one of the more, obvious things that we have to do anyway, is decarbonize electricity.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think computing is an issue. We're starting to think about GPUs and quantum computers, and what is the future technology? Where's it going to go?
Yeah.
Silicon's kind of reaching the end of its development phase. I'm not an expert on that. But,
yeah, I think Bitcoin's churning out 150 million tons
of
carbon every
we should
year.
go after Bitcoin before we go after the scientists looking at data.
I mean, the big data providers are going renewable, basically. So they're trying to do. But I mean, the insatiable appetite of some of the big data is a problem.
Yeah. Anyone else got a view in this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's so I think, echoing the comments around renew, I mean, it's actually, we know the solutions to decarbonise the electricity sector, so we can do that. And then there's also, I mean, we've seen some really interesting technologies around how you get more efficient. So one of the big problems is cooling these data centres. So we've seen some really interesting technologies that are more effective, use far less power for that cooling. So I think it's a combination of solutions there.
Yeah. All right, let me ask another one. John Price, we've got a name, so thank you, John. Are you in the room or are you online? Must be online. What kind of incentives / programs exist to incentivize entrepreneurship in fighting climate change? Brackets, particularly from a tech big data point of view. Chris, you're a founder. Has the government been good with incentives and looking after you?
Well, the government is actually quite good, but not in a climate change sense of context. We received an acceleration commercialization grant last year, which helped us to roll out the system in Australia.
Yeah, that's a good scheme. That's federal.
It's federal, yeah. But I'm not aware of any climate-related funding opportunities.
Is anyone else across that? Kristen,
I guess in terms of, certainly ARENA, a hugely important source of funding into the sector, and we work pretty closely with them on the renewable side, and hopefully with an expanded mandate across the board. There are certainly, obviously we're more of a commercial investor, and so, that's, where we really get involved. There are more and more kind of early stage funding opportunities, accelerators like StartMate, Energy Lab, for James here. So looking at this kind of area and how they help. There are also a variety of CRCs that are focused on specific areas. So there's one in WA focused on batteries, and there's a CO2 one. So and so there are a variety of different areas, and AC, I think, as well, accelerating commercialisation.
Yeah. The state government's just announced innovation funds in New South Wales to look at climate and innovation, and I would really encourage people to get in there quickly because I think there'll be as many people applying for it, but I would encourage people to do that. Yeah. And one thing I just say with ARENA, because having chaired that for 4 years, is that in the last sort of 2 years, I'd say a large amount of the focus of investing, of the grants that we gave, was to technology and data. There's a real shift over the period. And so there's a lot of sort of finding innovative solutions to basically overlay the technology transition that's going on.
Yeah, we've Innovation Base done work with ARENA every year for the last few years. I think we're doing another event coming up, which we'll talk about at the end. So, all right, let's keep rolling. This is fantastic. Ankit Jagannath, are you in the room? Yes. Hello, mate. Thank you. Thoughts or suggestions on carbon accounting in the face of corporate and national net zero targets? So yeah, everyone wants, well, not everyone, but many people are looking for net zero. Yeah. What's the carbon accounting perspective in that?
Right. So I think at the moment this is really difficult, right? Because I mean, you've got the Paris Agreement, you've got issues about corresponding adjustments between countries. Is one of the most complex issues that we're dealing with. One person's Scope 1 emissions is someone else's Scope 3, and so it hasn't. I mean, how you actually simply accounting for how much you emit is a fairly straightforward. Who's responsible for those emissions is a difficult issue, and then how you transfer credits as a result of actions is a really difficult issue. So I think at the moment that's very fluid. It's evolving, and I think when somebody, when the government is accounting for its own emissions, and then someone else is doing an activity that creates emission reductions and then sells it overseas, and it's a double count. This is what we're seeing. And so, interestingly, a very quick anecdote. There was a soil carbon trade last week, a private trade under a US scheme between an Australian and a US company. The government picked it up and said, wait a second, we've accounted for our national accounts. So how do we deal with that? So it's a really live issue at the moment. And I think when you're talking about something like carbon neutral LNG, which is what people are talking about, what do you bundle with that LNG? Is it just for the production? Is it for the life cycle? Is it for the whole use? Those are the sort of issues that people, and should we even have carbon neutral LNG? So those are the sort of issues that are being discussed at the moment. And then how do you measure it?
All right, we'll keep rolling. There's loads of questions coming in. So again, just jump in, vote them up, whatever you like. So Rob Nichols, thank you, Rob. So Rob, yes, there you are. The Prime Minister overnight, I didn't see this in the news this morning. Do you know, what was he talking at? Do you know? Business Council Australia. The PM has signalled a commitment. I mean, I think he maybe mentioned it before, but he's talking about it more. To put Australia on a path to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. So it's kind of a change for the government here. Is this a platitude, or do you think the government has got a real intention to act? Chris, I'm going to ask you first because you and I talked about an event you were at with a bunch of political donors who didn't believe in climate change. So where's the government at?
Well, but that doesn't mean that politicians are not turning around,
right,
and looking at the data and realizing what's really going on. But actually, yeah, that was kind of a funny event where I was asked if I believe in climate change. And
I don't know who did that table plan, but they should have really looked at that a bit more.
I don't know what data you mean. It must have been polling data. Not science data, I can tell you.
no, my wife asked me to get her a glass of wine from the bar, so
She probably needed several glasses of wine. But the Prime Minister in particular, I mean, is the government on the right path, do you think?
we had several discussions, or a few discussions, with federal ministers and also state ministers in Queensland. And my impression is they are fully aware what the impact will be of climate change on the economy, on our lifestyle, on Australia itself, and they are all interested in doing something. The question is there a political will to push it through? I think that is the main question. Is the political will there in the end to push all these ideas through?
All right, anyone else want to take a stab at that? Martin, you look like you want to jump in.
Oh no, I mean, this was coming and it had to come. I mean, the Europeans have been pushing about trade sanctions, and the Americans have been pushing very hard on Australia getting net zero, particularly in the lead up to the Biden summit. So the Biden summit's happening now, so Australia's position was time with that. Let's make no mistake about that. 2050 is too late. It's going to have to be 2040, 2035 at the rate we're going, as Steven's saying. And I think that all the state governments have been pretty committed to this for some time. The real challenge we have is a lack of coordination between governments. So if you're trying to decarbonise the entire energy system that sits across states, you need state governments to work together. But I think, we have to do this, and it's the right track.
Yeah. Anyone else in that one? All right, let's keep rolling. James Stewart asks, which corporate venture capital funds are active in the sector in Australia and globally, and therefore who should startups/innovators approach? Again, Chris, I might just jump to you quickly. I mean, like, you've raised money already? No? Are you in the process?
Sustainable in the process,
right?
Especially for the space activities we are planning.
So who are your top targets?
Well, we haven't started yet. So,
okay. All right. Well, you heard it here first. So Chris is raising money.
Yeah, everyone has money.
But do you have a hit list? Like, who are your top
No,
potential investors?
we talked to a few of investors already, but it's very, very early stage talks, so it's very preliminary.
Right.
So.
Kristen?
Yes. So, I mean, there are a host of, point out to IAG that invest in this space.
Yeah,
So,
IG
but
is active here.
so there are a host of corporate ventures. I mean, a lot of the oil and gas majors have their venture capital funds, and someone like Shell has actually done a lot of work in this space. So there's those, and then some of them do it directly, or they do it through, there are a couple of funds that manage that money. And then there are a whole host of different names that have come out, and I think that that are looking at putting capital into this space. Very general answer.
No, that's
a lot.
I don't think there is a great answer. I mean, there are some good investors out there that are focused on this space.
Yeah.
So, all right, another one from Mick. Thank you, Mick. Will Moore's law apply to climate technology? Stephen.
Moore's law.
Yeah.
The
doubling of speed. I think it's a year and a half.
Yeah, well, that's what I was referring to before when I was talking about computing technology, because silicon is kind of plateauing now, but our computing needs, we would love to be able to keep doing more so that we can come closer to being able to, predict in a useful way what's going to happen, seasonal, decadal, centennial scale climate predictions. So we're looking at new technologies, but it's uncertain where that's going. But GPUs, people are moving to that now. I think quantum computing is a big area that's exciting, and uncertain as to how much that could help us. But it looks like it's coming around the corner.
All right, anyone else on that one? Moore's law? No. All right, let me ask another one. Daria Tikhanova. Thank you. What's your view on Elon Musk's plans to replace public transport with affordable electric vehicles, I guess self-driving, and modernizing road networks to allow for increased traffic? That's got to be good. Who shall ask that one to? Kristen, maybe.
Sure. I mean, I think he does a lot of really great visionary stuff. I'm a big fan of public transport. I think that there's a real role for public transport to play, and I think that and the kind of micro mobility, public transport. I think you've still got all the embodied emissions in an EV. So it's far better, to move to electrification, but we don't need more. My view, we don't need more vehicles on the road. I think we need better public transport and electric transport.
I think the perception that everyone has to own a car, everyone wants to have his own car, is a perception which was growing the last 80 years as a kind of a status symbol. But if you really think about it, do we really need? Look at me. I drive my car in the morning to the office. It's a hybrid. So it parks there for 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours. Then I drive it home. Then it goes in the garage for 8 hours. So I drive it next morning back to the office and maybe to the shop. So now my car is 90% of the time stationary, somewhere blocking space, which can be used for parks or for other things. If we would change the perception, and this is completely my personal opinion, there's no scientific background to that because I didn't do any calculations or something like that. But I imagine if we all say we have self-driving cars, like the vision of Elon Musk is, and you have an app and you order a car, it comes, picks you up, brings you where you is, and it's all the time on the road, working as a workhorse to do the individual transport we also love. I think the cars on the road, the area we need for parking spaces, would be reduced massively. Imagine what you can do with the space in your garage.
It's an amazing vision. It's like Nirvana. But it's definitely going to take a little while.
I think there's a really interesting debate around it, we've looked quite deeply at autonomous vehicles and really like it, I think, as an investment space. And there's always a bit of a debate whether you end up actually with all these vehicles just kind of driving around all the time. So I think that whole balance, I think it will be partly policy and how that's kind of implemented. I think it's fantastic, but how you implement it is the kind of key.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
All right, we've got about 3 minutes, so I want to take one more quick question and then just do a final question to all of you. Justin Webb, Justin's the CEO at AgriWebb. He's a buddy of mine. He's a founder. He's also an investor. He's done a lot. It's about the way that employers brand themselves as green. So employer branding can benefit enormously from a carbon-aware mission, but it can be exaggerated. So how do investors or VCs separate greenwashing from genuine action? Marcin.
Yeah, well, I guess first of all, you've got to understand the space and what they're doing. I think secondly, what's really challenging in this is that how someone portrays themselves to be green. Is it just by simply buying offsets, or is it by reducing their emissions? And so one of the challenges at the moment is there's a lot of philosophical differences of opinion here about what is green and the use of offsets and all that sort of stuff. So I think generally, if you're going to decide about investing in green businesses, you have to decide what to you is the baseline about what quantifies as green and what is not greenwashing. And I think, there is one view that things have got to be pure. There's another view that you've got to try to do everything you possibly can. And even if, they take a Shell, Shell are doing terrible stuff at one level, they're doing great stuff at another level. Does that mean you write them off? That depends on your philosophy. There are a lot of European NGOs that are totally say offsets are off the table, and others that are very supportive of it. So I think, Telstra, who's just announced they've negated all their emissions through buying offsets, do you consider that to be a green play? I guess to some extent, as an investor, you have to decide what your metric is for determining what is green, and then you've got to basically apply that screen, which is really how we do it.
Yeah. Kristen, Simon, do you want to jump in? Or are you not waving?
Well,
Steven, sorry. No,
I just wanted to say that I'd like to see this as being one area where it would be nice to see more cooperation between the university sector and the investment and private sector, where I think one thing that we could bring to the table is some kind of assessment mechanism for assessing whether something is going to help the climate or not. I think there's other areas where I hope if people have ideas out there, let me know. We could see that kind of cooperation.
And there are some interesting businesses coming out around that, kind of looking at how you actually, truly assess, both the kind of the climate resilience, but also how green a company is. But I just echo Martine's, comments around, it's the philosophy of the company. It's actually the underlying data, what they're actually doing, I think, in terms of how we assess how green something is.
And I think there are a range of investors that market themselves on only investing in very green companies. And some of those, like Melior, are really good at running the metrics. They go very deep in the company, spend a lot of time working out what they're doing, as opposed to just a high-level screening. So I think that's also quite important.
The problem I see as a company is that there is no real standard of how efficient you are in reducing your carbon footprint as a company. And everyone we talk to has a different standard. So which standard do you adhere? That is a very tricky question to do. So I think for us as companies, for us as startups, it's very important to find our own footing and say, look, we want to reduce our carbon footprint, and this is the ways we are doing it. And however this fits in the matrix of the investor, is the investor's prerogative. It's not, we cannot change that.
And just one really important point. We started this conversation when you're talking about Paris alignment and where that is. So companies say, I want to be Paris aligned. Well, if Paris aligned is no longer 1.5, what does that mean? It's a really fluid, dynamic environment we're operating in.
Yeah. All right, look, last question. I always want to try and end on a positive note. So let me just ask this to all of you, and quick answers if we can. What are you most hopeful about? So let's maybe go from the end. So, Chris.
Well, I'm really seeing a lot of technology emerging, which will mitigate the impact of climate change. And I have 6 children and 5 grandchildren. So I'm hoping that, and I'm working really hard to do that, and to leave them a planet which is livable. And I think it's our responsibility to do that, and we are doing that. I think they're the right. It's going not as fast as I wanted to go, but I see all these initiatives going in the right direction, and I'm very hopeful that we will pull it off.
And Steven, a lot of what you've been producing is in many ways bleak, but what are you most hopeful about?
Well, similar, I guess. One thing Al Gore says is the climate system has tipping points, but the political system also has tipping points. And I think you can see some evidence that, for example, the announcement that Robert asked us about this morning, which I know nothing about, but the new announcement from Morrison. And so it seems like things are accelerating. So one hopes that will continue.
Yeah, we won't always be run by old white guys. Is that right?
That would probably help.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Kristen?
Yeah, look, I think that there's a lot to be really excited about. I think that even in the face of some of the data, but so I think that there's a whole lot of companies taking matters into their own hands, setting their own targets. And I think, as Chris was saying earlier, I think something I firmly believe in around, there's a tremendous opportunity here. Australia is so well positioned to really become, kind of a renewable superpower, and everything that comes off that, whether it's advanced manufacturing or kind of minerals, resources, batteries. So there's just so much opportunity for Australia.
Yeah. All right. Last word with you, Martin.
I think in the last 6 months, we've seen a tipping point on the investment side. So I think around the world, the amount of corporate activity and investment focused on net zero, it's remarkable how fast it's moved in the last 6 months. And if that pace continues, that gives me great optimism.
Yeah, great. All right, look, we are officially out of time. So, Chris, Steven, Kristen, Martin, thank you very much. All right, let me just do a quick wrap. We have applications open for our Renewable Energy Founder Forum. So this is what we've done for the last 3 years. This will be our third year. We're doing it in partnership with Arena that I mentioned before. It's a great initiative. If you're a startup and you're pitching or raising money, so maybe one for you, Chris, come along and have a look. So bit.ly/Renew Founder Forum. So check that out. It is well worth doing, and there'll be a really good crowd in the room. We did mention at the top, so this is self-promotion for us. We are hiring, and we'd love some help in either you who are watching or in the room applying, or someone that you might know. So we've got an events and marketing intern. We've got a director of membership for Canopy, which is our earlier stage founder club. We've got Summit, which is a late stage founder club. Horizon, which is an angel investor group. And a sponsorship manager to help us manage all these wonderful sponsors that are coming in. So if you know this, it could be you, or you know someone, please reach out, get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Almost finally, we're building South Australia's most impactful community of angel investors. We launched Horizon in Sydney and Melbourne. We're now going to South Australia. So if you're interested in joining, meeting some great people, having some curated deal flow, and you're in South Australia, this is a great opportunity. So just hit up Sam. She's memberships at innovationbay.com. Thank you, Airtree. I think they're all upstairs, but thank you, Airtree, for hosting and being with us and opening the door at 6 a.m., Mel. And thank you again massively to our national sponsors, the KPMG, AWS, Macquarie Bank, and of course IAG for helping pull this together. In the room, we're going to hang around and have some more food and drink, and we can do the fantastic networking stuff. And if you're online, thank you so much for joining. We'll be back in June, I think, with another one. So watch this space, and we'll announce that. That's it, I think. Claire, we good to go? All right.